Hello and welcome to this One Book, One Lincoln presentation. I'm Diane Gonzalez. The book all of Lincoln is reading and discussing this year is Americana by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, who grew up in Nigeria. Her novel is about a Nigerian woman who comes to the U.S. and how that experience changes her life. This is the 14th year for the One Book, One Lincoln program, sponsored by Lincoln City Libraries, and it's a pleasure to introduce my guest today. Lane Pierce is a librarian and coordinator of the One Book, One Lincoln program. Donna Marvin is a member of the library board and is the board's liaison to the selection committee. Yes. And David Smith is the man in charge. He is the chair of the selection committee. So thank you all for being with us today to talk about the books. Now, for those of you who've not finished any of the books yet, we won't reveal too much today, so keep watching. Let's start with the process, and the things were tweaked a little bit again this year, but you had a lot of nominations.
Well, we did. We had over 100 nominations, and this year what's really different is that unlike in the past when we've had voting, this year the selection committee selected all 3 finalists and a winner. From time to time the steering committee that decides how this all works does like to change up to create a little dynamism and keep things fresh. So we decided this year to go to this all selection committee process.
And also the thing that's changed as well is people can nominate books all year long.
Yes, at any of your libraries or branches you'll be able to go in and there'll be a little box there. Just if you don't see it, ask the people at the desk and you can turn in your nomination. And then we'll nominate all year long and close out that year on December 31st, but just go on nominating from then on. So please nominate.
All right. Because everything is considered.
That's right. Everything that's nominated will be considered, and this is, in our minds, I think everybody else would agree, is really the most important thing, are the nominations, because we do not add anything. We go solely by the nominations we get from the public.
Well, we are going to talk about Americana today, but also about the 2 other books that finished as finalists. Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel, or Mandel, I'm not sure, and Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson. And Donna, let's start with Station 11, which is set in a time when civilization is really collapsing.
Correct. Station 11 is a book that initially I did not feel like I was going to read this book. But of course, you know, we're tasked to read all of them. It's a book that takes place in America, and there's an apocalyptic occurrence.
A pandemic is involved.
It's a pandemic, and prior to this happening, you're brought into the story because there's a Shakespearean play taking place. And this very charismatic person suffers a heart attack and really disrupts this company. But very soon after, the pandemic occurs. And then civilization, as everyone knows it, changes worldwide. So this group of artists decide that they don't want to live any other way except through the arts and, you know, carrying on a symphony and Shakespearean plays are the ones that everyone that they encounter in little towns about their traveling areas, they want to see Shakespeare. So it's just a very interesting story, a different take on the science fiction genre that is out there. And this storyteller is so great because she just crafts this story in a way that you want to keep turning the page and find out what happens to the various characters.
What can you tell us about the author?
She's a rather young author. I think she's from England, but she's written 3 other books that have been pretty good. I know, Lane, you had read one that it was what Lola's
Quartet.
Quartet was a pretty good title also. So this was a popular one. As you know, we narrowed the titles, the top 10, to these 3, and they were all very close in votes.
Now, all 3, as you mentioned, are good reads. We're going to talk a little bit about the only biography in the 3 finalists. This was called Just Mercy, and it is written by Bryan Stevenson.
And the full title is Just Mercy, A Story of Justice and Redemption. And I think that really speaks to what the book is about. It's a memoir of sorts in its classification, but really a nice mixture of story and information that gets woven in. Bryan Stevenson in the late 80s started the Equal Justice Initiative, and that was basically an organization. He pieced together the funding that was helping people who were on death row who were not well represented and that may have been unjustly convicted along the way. And one of the things he does throughout the whole of the book is weaves a story about Walter McMillian. And it's sort of his first case that goes over a course of many, many years. It was also a case that was picked up by 60 Minutes, in fact. And a man who was convicted of murder of a college girl in Monroeville, Alabama. And although he had people willing to testify that he was not present at that, he was with those people at that time, all sorts of evidence that would indicate he wasn't guilty, he was still convicted. And although the jury sentenced him to life imprisonment, the judge sentenced him to death row, which was unusual at that time. But they were looking for a person to convict, and that's what happened to him. Luckily, well, I won't tell you what happens, but it's a positive outcome of sorts. But Stevenson does a great job of weaving in stories of other individuals all the way through, but also important information about perhaps the injustices that we find in the justice system today, and particularly focused on incidents in the South. He's located out of Alabama and Georgia. It's an incredible read, and I think a really important read as we look at the recent death penalty controversy here in Nebraska, as it's been pulled, and yet there are people out there that still want to see the death penalty in place. And so I think it's very informative and speaks well, would speak well to the public to hear personal stories along with a lot of factual information about the justice system at this point in time.
Both of those sound like wonderful books. What made Americana stick out and be the eventual winner?
Well, first let me start by saying that all of these three could have been the winner. They're all that good. The committee goes through a very thorough process, and we have various things that we're looking for. We felt like that the discussability of Americana was really good, not that it wasn't for the other two, but basically this book stood out because its approach, fresh, unique approach to what is race and racism and interracial relations was really quite refreshing and quite different.
Well, tell us the story. It's regard to two young people whose lives change when they leave their native country.
Yes, there's a dictatorship in Nigeria, and these two young people, Obinze and Ifemalu, decide that they're going to go to the United States. But because of some 9/11 issues, Obinze has to stay in England, and he eventually has to become an illegal because he can't get his visa renewed and he can't go back to Nigeria. But she comes over here to the U.S. and struggles, but eventually gets to Princeton and studies there, and she writes an incredible blog, which is, paraphrase the title, but it's something along the line about a blog by an American African to African Americans. Now, all through the book, you're going to see little excerpts from the blog, which do a great deal to tell you not only the things that the author wants to say about race, but about how the character feels about race. What makes this so great, imagine if this was a nonfiction book, is you'd be sitting there and you'd be solely encompassed in simply the blog statements. But because it's a fictional character, you understand how those statements, how those feelings relate back to that character and what happens to her in the course of the book. It is a love story, and so for those who love a good love story, eventually The question is, will the lovers get back together? Read the book and you will find out.
Well, all three deal with issues that are so current in our society today, obviously racism, the threat of pandemic, as well as justice and the death penalty. Is that kind of what made these three come to the top out of those more than 100 nominations? Donna?
Well, that's a really good question, but I don't think so. It really was that these were just very, very good books. Americana is such a fresh story. It never feels false. We were just immediately taken with it. I mean, another member mentioned that it was the best book he'd read all year. And he's a very well-read person. I think, really, when we voted, I think Americana and Just Mercy were just one vote apart. And I know that Brian Stevenson is a remarkable person. I guess his brother came and was at a multicultural lecture at LPS this year, so we're excited about the possibility of maybe meeting some of these authors.
And while the books are all dealing with subjects relevant to today, that also lends itself well to the discussion aspect of the One Book, One Lincoln program.
One of the things that we're always looking for with the books that we choose is whether they'll engage the Lincoln public. And I think all three of these books manage to do that in very different ways, as you'd expressed. But they do come back to the issues that are existing in the world today, and that make us think about. I always liken it to, it provides us a window into someone else's world, but at the same time it mirrors our own existence and our own beliefs and our own thinking along the way, and that just naturally leads to good discussions.
All right, we want to mention as well that you can get more information about the One Book, One Lincoln program by checking out the library's website at lincolnlibraries.org. Community discussions and special programs will be planned in September, October, and November. There are many resources for book groups. The library will even provide you with a discussion leader. Online you'll find links to Facebook, Twitter, email alerts, discussion questions, blogging, podcasts, lots of resources including author interviews. Now most of these three books they are available in most formats, both the physical book as well as all the electronic versions. And so there's no reason for you not to check them out. You can also remember that you can get a book club in a bag, which I think is a great idea. Right. What comes in that bag?
Well, you get multiple copies, and it can be checked out by the book club leader, and so therefore and there'll also be some sample questions, of course. But like you said, we are more than willing and happy to send a discussion leader if a group wants that. And I would say on the programming that August 9th, I can tell you this already, that we will have an event called Americana Africana, which will be with the Ethnic Studies and African Student Association at Bennett Martin, and that will be looking at Americana from an African perspective. And so, because we all know many perspectives, but that's a perspective that's so important in this book. So we're excited about that. In October, we're going to have an event with the Lincoln Lancaster Genealogical Society that will talk about research for African Americans and American Africans as far as researching their entry into the country and their other genealogical information. So we're really excited about that programming.
Now, a couple times in the past we've been able to have the authors here. Obviously, Joe Starita, his book was chosen, and he is a local author. Also, I think it was the very first year we had Kent Harif here.
Correct.
And he has since passed, I believe he just passed away over the past year. Mm-hmm. Any chance that we can get Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie to come and visit us?
Well, of course, we always try to get all the authors. I think that she's pretty well booked up for this year. But we're always trying to get the authors, and maybe, sometime in the future it'll work out for us.
She spends her time between the U.S. and Nigeria now, so she's not here all the time.
Yes,
so.
And she's a great speaker, and so she's obviously does a lot of just public speaking as well as, talking about her books.
I'm sure there you can find interviews with her online.
Yes, and that'll be on our Facebook. We've got a lot of information there, interviews, biographies, You know, just a lot of interesting things. So I would encourage people to take a look at all that too.
Her own story is very interesting.
Yes, it is. It's a very interesting. She's an incredibly interesting person, and so that's another reason we're really excited about this too. Because you know, she by herself, if she hadn't written any books, she's already a very incredible person.
Now, have you two been involved with the program all 14 years? Been involved quite a while, I think.
Yeah, I've probably been involved about 7 or 8 at this point in time. I've chaired the committee for the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
You
and
must
was
be
on
good at
prior
it.
to that. Well,
He's very
either
good.
that or I'm gullible and willing
yes.
to do it.
Are you pleased with the direction that One Book, One Lincoln has continued to take?
I am. I like the fact that the library continues to mix it up a little bit, because I think that's really important for a program not to get stale. And so initially, there weren't a top 3. It was just a book that came out of the committee. Then we went to a top 5 and then a top 3, and then the community was voting, and now we've made the choice, but still have the top 3 here available, and later in the year our top 10 list will also go online at the library. And so I know that a number of people involved with book clubs look forward to those lists to come out, because they really are some of the best books that are out there right now.
And they know that they're part of a whole community-wide discussion as well.
Absolutely.
And Donna, are you pleased with how the program is still being received in its 14th year?
I think it's wonderful that this program has continued for 14 years. It's really exciting. It's a great statement about the community of Lincoln, because it means that we have a lot of really interested and engaged readers. The public really keeps the program going. And I think the library and the library staff is just remarkable. They do a lot to make it the success it is.
And I suppose if someone wanted to start a reading list, you just take all the winners and the finalists from the past 14 years, and you'd have a good start on some of the best books being written today.
Well, and actually, you could take the top 10, and because those are available through all the years too, and you'd have some great books. And I would say, just to make for clarification, that the group of 10 will come out, you know, after we get everything else going, and you know, a month or so after all that, it'll be out there. But what's different about that is that the 3 books, the 3 finalists, we actually buy additional copies and additional formats for. So some people may be saying, well, 3, 10, what's the difference? Well, that's the difference. We actually increase the amount available to you for those 3, and the winner, of course.
And the whole goal is to get people in Lincoln reading.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And that is important not just for adults, but for kids. Has there ever been a thought about doing One Book, One Lincoln for kids?
Yeah, it's been discussed. I mean, that would fall in the youth area, and
Right,
they would have to
right.
carry that ball. But yes, it's been discussed. I think the idea, the basic idea of trying to get people to read the same thing, and then not only read but engage enough to actually discuss it with other people, I think that's really what this is all about. That's what makes it really different, as opposed to just, here's a list of things, why don't you go read them. That's what makes this special, I think.
All right. Thank you all 3 very much for being with me today. Again, LincolnLibraries.org is the website where you'll find all the information about the One Book, One Lincoln program. We encourage all of you to read Americana, as well as the 2 finalists, Station 11 and Just Mercy. And I'm Diane Gonzalez. Thank you for joining us for this One Book, One Lincoln presentation.